Alrighty, what's up guys, Single Player Nacho here. Dead by Daylight and Resident Evil, When Worlds Collide. Two of my favorite universes mixing together. So in a couple of months we'll be getting a Resident Evil killer or BOW in Dead by Daylight. And now it's time to speculate what monster out of the infinite amounts of possibilities may or may not make it. Sorry, Salazar, we already have Victor. You gotta sit this one out. We'll also take a crack at what these BOWs' powers would look like in the game. How fast would they be? Of course, unfortunately, we'll only get one or maybe even two. So what perks and how would they kill the poor survivors in the game? First is the most obvious choice, the Nemesis. An iconic noseless or nose-filled face of the game. Easily one of the more recognizable monsters, straight off the shelves of the Umbrella Corporation. Now this would make the most sense because this isn't just a regular Resident Evil merging with Dead by Daylight, this is the 25th anniversary Resident Evil. So you'd think that the killer would be a more classic one, rather than a newer character that's just been introduced in the past 5 or so years. Now the Nemesis is objectively horrifying, a perfectly engineered top to bottom killer. Perfect for hunting down stars and anyone or anything. This guy does not discriminate, but that might just be the problem with adding him into the game. The Nemesis might just be a little too advanced, with his possible weaponry being a fucking rocket launcher and his tentacle arm. Survivors are already screwed on themselves, they can hardly defend themselves, so why would you have the Nemesis? You'd have to really tone this guy down. So if the Nemesis is introduced into Dead by Daylight, his ability should be a mutate ability where he gains a rocket launcher, maybe some extra movements, similar to that of the Oni. At a cost, of course, maybe the Nemesis gets a little bit exhausted after using this ability. Still, the problem is you have to really tone down the Nemesis because, again, this is supposed to be the perfect killing weapon. So if you don't get all 4 survivors in a round, you are a failure, Nemesis. And next is an obvious choice, Lady Dimitrescu, Mrs. Milky. Why wouldn't you add her or even think that it's a profitable good idea to have Lady D in Dead by Daylight? This woman isn't even out yet, and she has a very clear fandom, albeit a fetish fandom, for her. The Resident Evil Village release date coincides with the Resident Evil chapter in Dead by Daylight. The dates are very close to each other, so from a marketing perspective, it makes too much sense. So you add Lady Dimitrescu, a 9-foot ancient vampire, very creepy but kinda sexy, let's be real. So she definitely fills that vampire archetype in Dead by Daylight. She'd hurl her blood wine bottles at you for weapons, but they're not filled with blood, it's actually milk, just to make it that more appealing. Lady D's ability would be some kind of simp magnet, where it makes all survivors a little bit more audible around her, pass love notes during the round, stuff like that. An awareness ability is what I'm trying to say. I can definitely see Lady Dimitrescu in Dead by Daylight. Next we have MR.X, who probably wins the popularity contest between the Nemesis and himself in the more recent years, I will say. So he's instantly recognizable and pretty popular. Not only that, but the mechanics of MR.X through and through is perfect for a Dead by Daylight killer. Slow-paced, but a force to be reckoned with when he finds you. Now the downside of adding MR.X. Most, if not all, Dead by Daylight killers have a rich lore to them, a tragic backstory or a very freaky backstory. That's why I fell in love with the game in the first place. MR.X is a robot. Physically, very intimidating, and he acts like a Dead by Daylight killer. But that's where it ends. He just becomes an engineered killing weapon after that. And while MR.X is an intimidating force, he just doesn't make any noise at all. MR.X's weapons would be his fists, pretty basic, maybe some cool customizable brass knuckles. And let's have MR.X toss his fedora at people. It's about time he uses that deadly attire. And for his ability, I'd give him some kind of hardened skin buff where Mr. X has to load up during the match. He activates it and he can just go through barricades, doors, a little bit of a speed buff maybe, and he gains the ability to knock the shit out of people in one hit, which is basically just the Terminator, really, which I would also love to have in the game. But why have that when you can also have Albert Wesker? That one guy that wears sunglasses indoors. What a dick. But if you don't want a monster in the game, this is one of those human characters that can work. Very demented mind, a psycho through and through. Albert Wesker would really make sense in Dead by Daylight. He's also pretty recognizable and has a perfectly lined up survivor in Chris Redfield. Now that's the good stuff. The bad stuff is also Albert Wesker is a perfect killing machine in Resident Evil lore, and I don't see him having enough differing characteristics for him to stand out. Like, what would his weapons be? A silenced handgun? A sniper rifle? It just doesn't make sense aside from a tentacle arm that he gains in Resident Evil 5. He does know Kung Fu, I mean that's something, right? Wesker's ability though would no doubt have something to do with speed. He injects himself with the crack virus, which is a lesser known lore item, which might just be a little bit too OP for Dead by Daylight. And the very last of the classic characters would be William Birkin, which is also a perfect lore addition to Dead by Daylight. His archetype, the crazed scientist who injected himself with his own lunacy, the G-Virus. It makes so much sense to add William Birkin into Dead by Daylight. On that fact alone, William is also a terrifying monster, half human, half meat face, and he already has a perfect weapon, a steel pipe. And given William Birkin's Jekyll and Hyde tragic story, it gives him a lot of personality and would strike fear into Dead by Daylight players, no doubt. Seeing as he's already transitioning into a monster, I'd give William a mutate ability, damage buff, and he just becomes very slimy and disgusting. Maybe a G stage 2, and he still has that steel pipe on him in that mode, which is hilarious. Now this is a guy I would absolutely love to have in the game. Jack Baker, who is filled to the brim with quotable personality. And just take a look at that portrait. It is perfect. It lines up very well with the other killers. And Jack's lore, you know, a family man whose entire family was torn apart by a mold little girl named Evelyn. So not only is he a human character that fits well with Dead by Daylight killers, he's not a psychopath. This is one of those sad, dark stories where things were done to Jack, rather than him just being crazy and an asshole psychopath. Now, that's not to say that Jack Baker isn't scary. Under the molded influence, he does stuff like that. And this.
Boy, have your attention, boy. You're about to see some wonderful. Oh, fuck!
And as I've said before, just filled with personality.
You got yourself a boo-boo!
Jack's weapon would be a shovel. I mean, he looks like a grave robber, if anything. Definitely good reach on that weapon. And my two honorable mentions. Both of them creatures. The Verdugo and the Regenerator. The Resident Evil 4 bias is apparent. With Verdugo, agile, mysterious, and there's room to add to the lore behind the Verdugo. And I can't think of a scarier addition that would make sense than the Regenerators. The breathing alone, already it has its own unique breathing sounds. And it has some cool attacks, and this monster is just so scary. I think I would legitimately be scared playing against these things. Could you imagine it sneaking up on you, the last generator, and you hear... Yeah, no thanks. So which one of these killers would you like to see most in Dead by Daylight? What would their abilities be, their perks, their weapons? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for checking out the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like if you did. Subscribe for more horror lists, lore, and mysteries. If you'd like to support the channel any further, there is a link to a second channel and merch in the description. Check those out. Have an awesome rest of your day. And as always, stay single.